In the 1980s and 1990s, stealth and stealth fighters in particular were everything, and not just in military circles, but also the cultural zeitgeist. My guess is it had something to do with the revelation of the F-117 and the B-2 in the 1980s, as well as the success of the F-117 in Desert Storm. Stealth aircraft were kind of everywhere. One example that comes to mind is the movie Executive Decision, where an aircraft that looks an awful lot like a modified F-117 transports a commando team aboard a hijacked airliner. But maybe my favorite example is the F-19 stealth fighter toy and model. I had one, and I'm sure a lot of you watching this channel did too. I actually didn't know about this, but when I was getting reference images for this video, I ended up reading a Wikipedia article on the F-19, and it's interesting to me that the model was conceived and built prior to the revelation of the F-117 in 1988. It's actually a 1986 design. The 1986 article in the LA Times by Paul Ciotti, and if I'm butchering your name, Paul, I'm sorry, describes a conversation between the model maker executive and a concept artist and aviation buff familiar with stealth fighters named John Andrews. "Is this something that's really flying?" Kadish asked Andrews. "Yeah," Andrews replied. "How accurate is this compared to what's out there?" "Well, what you've got in your hand isn't very accurate at all," Andrews said. "I could do a lot better." "How much better? 50% accurate?" Actually, Andrews said he could probably come up with something that was 90% accurate. The article goes on to describe Andrews' design process, taking information from his friends in the 70s and 80s aviation industry and then applying knowledge from known aircraft at the time. He based the overall design and shape on the SR-71, and according to the article, he had apparently seen the D-21 drone that was launched by the Blackbird. The Blackbird influence is certainly felt in the final model. Then Mr. Andrews describes that he had heard that the aircraft would have the same engines as the F-18C, just without the afterburners. And then he assumed the aircraft would be subsonic as a result. And supposedly that is the origin of the design of the F-19 stealth fighter. Now, one of my rules on this series, where I build aircraft in Flyout that never flew and then fly them, is that I will always match the outside appearance of an aircraft and, if the information is available, the dimensions and the engine performance as close as possible. Now, for the F-19, Mr. Andrews had intended the aircraft to have a 24-foot or 7-meter wingspan. And he had intended the aircraft to use the General Electric F404 engines, which generate 54 kilonewtons of thrust, and I was able to match that. I also decided to be not lazy on this one and actually program in landing gear doors for the model. And with that, and the model complete, it was time to slap on some black livery and take it into the air for the very first time. And that's what it would normally happen at this point in the video, except it didn't, and this happened instead. Eventually, of course, I did manage to get it into the air. You see, it just starts with the thrust-to-weight ratio being off, and the aerodynamics don't take effect until it's too far down the runway. The wings are too small compared to the rest of the fuselage, and the chines, that are supposed to be on the nose and generate additional lift, don't really work. Now, I tried extending the chines using Flyout's procedural wings, but they moved the center of pressure too far forwards, and I couldn't change the center of gravity enough to overcome it, thus rendering the chines not just ineffective, but outright dangerous. When in the air, the aircraft is unstable about all three axes, and it has negative static and dynamic stability. At high angles of attack, the aircraft gets itself into an oscillation along the longitudinal axis that gets progressively more violent until it departs controlled flight and becomes unrecoverable. Further, straight and level flight is merely a dream, as the aircraft will pitch wildly and unpredictably up to 70 degrees nose up or down, and without warning. And I think it comes back to something fundamental. You see, in the 1986 article, Mr. Andrews said that he based the design in part on the SR-71 Blackbird. But the Blackbird was designed for Mach 3 flying, so the aerodynamic properties that it uses aren't the same as the ones for subsonic flying. To compound the issue, the canards and where he placed them were ineffective against this configuration, not to mention that they would have blocked airflow going into the engines. Fortunately, though, there's an alternate configuration that puts the canards onto the side of the fuselage. And the results of this configuration are actually worse, and I think it has something to do with the centers of pressure and gravity being even with each other vertically on the second version, but I can't really be sure. But let's not call this baby too ugly, because it's not. As far as looks alone, I think it's a pretty airplane, and it's entirely possible that my build isn't doing it justice. I mean, Flyout is good, but it has its limitations. I generally work under the assumption that Flyout is only about 80% accurate, And while 80% is 80% and it'll get you close, there's still a large margin for error when it comes to aircraft performance. And returning to the design itself, Mr. Andrews' design was so good, in fact, that there were literally congressional hearings about how this airplane leaked when it was in fact a fake. It reminds me of how 34 years later, the Dark Star scene in Top Gun Maverick was actually tracked by Chinese spy satellites thinking the US had developed a new hypersonic spy plane. And to his credit, Mr. Andrews did put a lot of thought into the design. He wanted an aircraft that could do the suppression of enemy air defense or SEAD mission, and he gave it a weapons bay with weapons not unlike the F-117 and the Raptors and the Joint Strike Fighter that eventually succeeded it. And all of this was done before any details on the F-117 had been released, so I tip my hat to him for those reasons alone. Ultimately then, what this airplane probably needs in order to be done justice is a fly-by-wire system not unlike the F-117's. Now, this can be supported in Flyout, but it requires some programming that right now is above me. Maybe one day I'll be able to revisit this airplane and give it its due by programming a fly-by-wire system, but today is not that day. Thank you for watching. If you have any suggestions on how to do a fly-by-wire, please leave a comment. Also, feel free to leave a comment if you had this model as a kid or if you built the model kit. Hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to see more airplanes that never flew and finally take to the digital skies. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.